For being as big as it is, Endless Mode has never actually been endless. It's always had a lot of waves, but John never gave it infinite rounds. It's always been in this weird state of being a hybrid between a standard mode and an actually endless one. Unlike today, Endless originally had 121 waves, and just 7 days after release, waves 100 through 173 were reworked or added to the game. Of course, this is likely because of how rushed Endless had to be. John has even come out to say, after wave 100, it was just random bullshit go. And random bullshit doesn't really make for a fun or engaging mode. And this is a problem because Endless is a really important part of the game. It serves as a longer, more difficult mode than Expert, but it's most likely easier and a longer mode than Nightmare. It's also where towers like Golden Juggernaut, the Mobsters, and Warship can truly shine because of the super high health and damage of enemies and the insanely high economy. Endless also gives a good amount of gold, XP, and tokens alongside its main reward of power-ups. Cause let's be real, there are definitely better modes for gold and XP, but damn, look at all those power-ups. So how can a mode that rewards players almost everything in the game, has 8 boss fights just in the first 80 waves alone, 4 of whom are unique to the mode, and that lets players test how far they can go, feel so boring? Endless seems like it would be super fun. It not only has all the bosses from the other 4 modes, but manages to have them be just 5 ways apart from each other without feeling like they're cramped or rushing you. And before they spawn, there are a bunch of new enemies for players to defend against. And can I just say how these enemy designs are really cool? Like, just look at them. Half scientist, half zombie. It's cool. It matches Dr. Xenon. It makes sense. As I just said, they're part of Xenon's Plague Division, and it's always cool to see more of her faction. It feels like we know so little about Xenon's side of the war, so I really hope we get to explore that more. There's an enemy called Prisoner who after dying spawns their own soul to keep on attacking you, and stuff like that is just really neat in my opinion. Revived mutated zombies are an upgrade of the regular one, reminding us that for some reason in TDX, coming back from the dead actually makes you stronger. Then there are Disposalists, who serve as an upgraded Grenadier who can be really dangerous if you don't take them out quickly. It's some of TDX's better work for an early game, especially when compared to something like the original Elite mode. On top of the cool early game, the content you fight after Eradicator Mark II really starts to pick up and is where you get into the real meat of Endless. Ravages, Grumbles, and Herculeans start spawning among others. This is truly uncharted territory in the mode where there's only new content from here on out. And by wave 50, the first new boss spawns. Xenon's Walking Gun, Eradicator Mark IV, marks a turning point. It's a new boss exclusive to the mode and it sets a precedent. These bosses are here to kill your towers, and they'll do it well. The 2 bosses after, Eradicator Mark 1C and Apex Predator, are even deadlier, and in Apex Predator's case, more iconic. There's more than just Xenon's creation, however. On wave 80, the Scout from Hell Calamity spawns. This is a good wrap-up to the canon part of Endless Mode, serving to set up the Calamity faction as an adversary and show what Xenon's been up to after Christmas 2023. Calamity's fight is unique enough, mainly because of the scream and spawn attacks, and leaves players intrigued about what the hell they just fought. It's definitely cool on your first few times beating it, even if it is just a void knockoff. But after sending the Calamity back to where they came from, the mode has a pretty steep drop-off in quality. Beyond wave 80, the enemies become increasingly more random. Now, in an Endless mode, it's pretty standard for games to throw all their different enemies at you, but this mode goes from being relatively composed in the canon ways to not at all in the non-canon ones. We go from fighting Eradicators and Dr. Xenon stuff to Christmas 2023, April Fool's 2024, and finally Tower Battles enemies. There's no real rhyme or rhythm to it, it kind of just switches. Waves in between the bosses aren't really that great either. They devolve into spamming some of the same handful of enemies over and over in hordes, and they just increase the HP each time. And with other waves, they just place one moderate to high HP target for you to take out, oftentimes in 1 or 2 shots from warships. This wave structure devolves into what feels like inflating the number of waves, cause seriously, 1 enemy is not a complete wave, nor is it fun. Additionally, there aren't flying enemies in Endless. This mode is huge, and not having to think about that entire layer of gameplay only makes the mode more flat and boring. I mean, we have 200 waves, and none of them include flying enemies even once. Flying enemies are some of the coolest, and not having them in the game makes it a lot more one-dimensional. So all in all, Endless waves post-Calamity aren't the greatest. And while this isn't the biggest issue in TDX, the game's early progression definitely needs to be overhauled first, I think TDX should eventually get a rework to these later waves to make them not only include all current and future content, even from events, but to make Endless an always replayable, unique experience that lets players grind power-ups. Endless needs a real goal on what it's doing, and I think it should be something like the following. Endless should be an endless mode with no wave cap, used primarily to grind power-ups and secondarily used to grind currencies, and a vault of all the game's content. Speaking of all the game's content, events are a majority of it. They're some of the game's greatest content. Not only do they come with full soundtracks, tons of new enemies with new color palettes and themes, new bosses, and for the large events, battle passes, but in my opinion, events are some of the game's best quality work beyond a few outliers. I think that bringing the events back was a great idea, although it was executed with some questionable decisions. I would love to see more events in Endless, as the aforementioned Christmas 2023, April Fool's 2024, and Tower Battles have already been ported inside. To rework Endless, we have to employ the help of our old friend RNG, but fortunately for us, this isn't going to be like mysteries or mystery bosses. No, this RNG is going to be used to select what enemies and bosses you fight. Wait, that feels kind of similar. Alright, let me explain what I mean. See, my idea is that we create mini wave structures of about 15 or so waves, and then have them be picked procedurally to make Endless mode not only truly endless, but to make each time you play the mode be distinct from one another. This would also almost eliminate the possibility of you playing the same thing twice in a row. You would almost always be playing something different each time. For how these mini structures would be made, every mode would first be condensed into 15 or so waves, like I said. These wave substructures should basically act as mini versions of the mode they're based on. Each wave would include multiple, hopefully unique enemies to make dynamic encounters in between the boss waves. The enemies would go from early game over to late game as this section progressed, until you finally reach the final boss of the converted mode on wave 15. Other non-final bosses from the mode could appear too, such as Destructor, King, or even Corrupted Apex Predator. Including these extra bosses is a win-win, as it's easy to have a whole wave dedicated to them, which saves development time, wink wink John, but it also reels the player back into being entertained. Plus, we get to experience the game's great content in another form. After defeating the final boss of the section, a new section would then be selected. This of course would go on for another 15-ish waves, repeating the process as long as the player can go. To make the transition between waves a little bit more seamless, I think that Advisor, or really any of the narrators within reason, should have dialogue to tell the player what's coming next. Something like Advisor telling us how the Void's forces have been spotted and he's our next opponent. The rest of the segment's waves could have dialogue too, but I think that's a little more optional since players should already know these enemies by the time they fight them here. Lastly, I think that Wave 81 should start off with Advisor saying something along the lines of, "Good work, Commander. Officially, we're clearing off the battlefield, but you can stay here for as long as you want. Anything you do will be off the records though. Good luck." There should be something to let the players at least know that the mode is transitioning into non-canon waves, even if it's just hinting it. But overall, I think transitioning between segments via dialogue would help make it a little more clear on what's happening, especially for a first-time player of the mode. For wave structures, they could be based on Tower Battles, The Awakening, Frosty's Invasion, April Fool's, the core modes, Endless itself, of course, and all other content. Any mode can be converted into one of these sections to be easily added to Endless. The more wave structures there are, the more Endless can be varied, not only per match, but to prevent enemies from being fought repeatedly in any given match. Events with multiple chapters could split each night into different sections too. This not only lets the night's final boss shine, but lets players fight enemies from their respective night. This also simply increases the amount of wave structures there are, which of course makes it more varied. It splits what would be about 60 waves into 4 different sections of 15. This also shortens the time players have to fight enemies from the Awakening, letting it be switched for something else to keep it fresh before players get tired of it. Now, in terms of difficulty and rewards, this would more or less follow what Endless has already set up. The difficulty would progressively ramp up as the game got into later rounds, also increasing the rewards given. This would be a slow linear creep that starts up after wave 80. Difficulty would be, of course, enemy health, but also the amount of enemies, their speed, resistances, and so on. You can be really creative with this. After wave 200, the game would continue to let you play, and as such, the rewards would increase as well. But noticeably, all the rewards besides power-ups would start to stagnate by this point. Seriously, Endless after wave 80 is not good for gold grinding, don't waste your time. Additionally, I think Endless bosses should be rebalanced to be harder in the first 80 waves. Things like Mark 4's cannon being able to kill anything again, Mark 1C using his laser sweep, and things like that. Endless bosses should be difficult enough to be worthy of being above expert mode. These bosses have been nerfed over time to not be very dangerous to your towers anymore. Mark 4 isn't much of a threat to me when my gold jugs can tank his most powerful attack, and Mark 1C's cool second phase isn't different at all because laser sweep never seems to fire anymore. And if ported, the bosses from other modes, especially difficult ones like General Selgar, should be an actual threat to your towers. One of the reasons Endless is so boring is because most of the time you don't have to do anything, particularly in the modern day when its bosses have been nerfed. Boss fights are hardly entertaining because there aren't any substantial tower deaths. And no, spamming calamities for the scream doesn't count as enough tower death. That type of stuff feels lazy to me since you spawn a walking health bar to get taken down to a low enough health to automatically kill a quarter of your towers. It's much more fun for a boss to beam or chop your towers down than to have them yell and instantly kill a bunch. Now, before we get into this next section, I want to teach you all what I consider early game, mid game, late game, and end game. Ready? From Ranger to John is early game. John? Yeah, John. While he can be really good in every mode, like seriously, his cost is really low to buy in the shop compared to a lot of things. I mean, he's only 4,500 gold. That's barely over twice as much as Missile Trooper. He's really not that expensive, so players can get him early, hence early game. Mid game is from Laser Gunner to Juggernaut. Late game is from Ghost to level 100, and level 100 or 100,000 gold is endgame. This also includes Nightmare Towers, unless those towers do not meet their previous requirements. But as a default, all Nightmare Towers are considered endgame by me. 3 of the Golden Towers are in late game, while 1 is in endgame. Why? Mainly because of price. Also, Mobster is already a late game tower, and Golden Mobster is a better version of him, so that combined with his price makes me feel like he belongs in endgame. Golden Juggernaut is currently the best DPS tower in the game, but is soon to be topped by Refractor. It also doesn't meet the requirement for gold to be an endgame tower, so he's late game. But now back to Endless mode, don't be afraid to have it be deadly. Game modes like Endless and Nightmare have their balancing shift away from mid-game players to focus on the late to endgame players. A rough estimate would be people with at least Golden Ranger, Railgunner, or XWN. This gives the devs freedom to make the enemies truly lethal towards endgame towers. They don't have to be held back by balancing it for both golden towers and more intermediate ones. After Calamity, the mode should be balanced entirely for golden towers, nightmare towers, and other late game ones. Enemies and bosses need to be threatening to these absolute units of towers. People have Mobster and his golden variant. They can earn their money back. They have Golden Juggernaut with its 7 to 10,000 HP and thousands of DPS, only rivaled by Warship and Refractor. They have Medic to heal back any scratches your towers might get. Seriously, this mode should earn the fact it's placed above Expert. And don't worry, the rewards for this new Endless wouldn't be too crazy either. While I do envision players ending up going very far and getting a lot of rewards, it wouldn't break the game. The amount of time it takes to get into super late Endless waves starts to become hours, making Endless past wave 80 not worth it for grinding anything but power-ups. And since the rewards in this new system would scale like present day Endless, this would remain a mode you do for power-ups, not gold. You also would be doing it just to challenge yourself on how far you can get, more of a self-fulfillment thing than a material one. I also think that after wave 200, it might be a good idea to focus more on the new currency instead of gold. Starting on wave 201, gold would almost dry up, only giving you a little bit for each wave you get past. Instead, the second currency could start being given. Now, this would be a secondary source for grinding the stuff, so it wouldn't give you too much of it, just enough to reward players for their time, but because most players getting past wave 200 are going to be late or endgame, then, let's be real, they don't need gold or even XP anymore. That ship has sailed. And once more, this is just a secondary way to get the currency, not a way to grind the stuff efficiently. Now imagine fighting General Selgar or Corrupted Mark II in Endless mode as they mow down your towers because you got bored of playing another mode and wanted to grind. You would have all of your favorite late game towers to shred through them as they fire back in return. And of course, warships would finally be able to face off against these guys, something I've always wanted to do. Bosses like the aforementioned would require some recodes to make them work on traditional maps, but I think it would be really cool to have. Events have some of the game's best bosses and coolest content in general, and I would love to see it be in Endless. Of course, future content would be added sometime after it releases too. Adding new content to Endless is also a good way to have small updates for the game when we're in between large ones, something that has been a problem for the team to do because of working on Nightmare Mode and Tower Battles Part 2 so much. When the team goes full steam ahead on these projects, we don't have anything in between updates. And this has of course led to TDX, quote, dying, but this would also keep the mode as a way to store all of the game's enemies in one place. I even think that Nightmare Mode, for as complicated as it is speculated to be, should have its enemies added to Endless. This really should be something where you can face off against every enemy in the game. And hey, what's the harm? We get more enemies to face off against, which makes the mode more fun to play. Additionally, to prevent wave structures from being played repeatedly in one match, after a section has been played, it should not be picked again until at least 5 other sections have been completed. This helps to keep bad RNG from making the match boring by throwing the same enemies at you. Also, since Wave 200 is special and spawns Void Apex Predator, I think it's only fair to give him his own section. And because of how 15 divides 200, his section can slide perfectly into waves 186 through 200, with Void Apex Predator of course being on wave 200 himself. I find words can be a hard way to understand what I'm saying sometimes, so I wanted to make some visual examples to go along what I meant by a wave segment. I also wanted to give an example of what these wave structures should look like. Of course, we're shooting for 15 waves. I chose Frosty's Invasion for this because I think it's one of the best modes in the game in general, and is definitely one I'd like to see adapted. For Wave 1, it would start off with Arctic Scouts and toys. I'll be keeping numbers ambiguous for the most part, since stats and enemy amounts will vary. Also, I'm just not equipped to balance that stuff properly. Wave 2 would summon more of those along with Wendigo hunters on steroids to pick off your towers. Wave 3 would be similar, but with more focus on the Wendigo hunters and damaging your towers. Wave 4 would serve as an homage to the wave from Christmas 2 Nightmare, spamming you with Ginger drones and toys. The 5th wave will have Lumberjacks and Resurrected Cryoblasters spawn, letting the Lumberjacks tank for the Cryoblasters as they debuff your towers close to the path. Wave 6 would be similar with Resurrected Cryo Rangers and Snow Gangstas, as well as Wendigo Hunters, because I love them so much. Wave 7 will introduce the Snow Mob, Ice Capone, Coalman, and Belsnickel. Wave 8 spawns a couple Elder Wendigos alongside Cryo Rangers, Ice Capones, Snow Gangstas, Evergrim Summoners, and Deathwalkers. That's right, this would also finally add flying enemies to Endless Mode, something I think is sorely missing from it. Wave 9 brings 3 more Elder Wendigos, Wraith Riders, Evergrim Summoners, Deathwalkers, Frozen Gladiators, Ice Capones, and Wendigo Hunters. The 10th wave would debut Phantoms, Snow Predators, and Ginger Dreads among other enemies. Wave 11 will bring Snow Predators, along with Resurrected Cryo Blasters and Cryo Rangers. Wave 12 would then have Phantoms, Wraith Riders, Snow Gangstas, and Shadows. Wave 13, nicknamed Roblox HQ, would have a bunch of Predators and Snow Predators spawn, along with everybody's least favorite, Snow Apex Predator. Wave 14 will then rush you with Snow Wendigos, Ancient Frosts, Elder Wendigos, and sped up Wraith Riders and Deathwalkers. Finally, on Wave 15, Selgar spawns alongside previous enemies seen in this section. Wendigo Hunters, Deathwalkers, Wraith Riders, Wendigos, and Ice Capones would stand behind Selgar to decimate your towers as the general soaked up the damage, inflicting heavy casualties himself. This is a prime example of what I envision for these mini wave structures. These sections really are just a condensed, or in this case expanded version of the mode. It's the, this movie has been modified to fit your screen of wave structure. Of course, like I said, damage and health will automatically scale based on how far the player is in the game, along with the rewards. But this is how all the converted modes should look. Show us the coolest enemies and let us play against them on Oil Rig, or whatever map. I don't know, how many people even play Endless on other maps? For how to convert something even shorter, such as everybody's least favorite Halloween Chapter 4, we'll have to do a little more expanding. To hit that 15 wave mark we're going for, each wave in the original mode will have to be 3 in Endless. To do that, I'll be taking an approach of having weaker fodder enemies come first and the wave's stronger enemies coming in the following 2 waves. As such, Wave 1 would start with a horde of frenzied villagers, with some prowlers hiding among them. Wave 2 would then spawn zealots, banshees, executioners, and psychos. Wave 3 will have diabolists, cultist ambushers, air diabolists, and wraiths spawn. So, like I said, we turned one wave from the mode into 3 waves for the endless adaptation, and with the first wave having the easiest enemies and wave 3 having the hardest. Wave 4 would then spawn Dread Knights and Vile Seraphs, followed by Wave 5 spamming Husks to cover for Tarnished Clergymen and Vile Seraphs. Wave 6 would summon Dread Knights to tank damage for the star of the show, Battle Master tanks, to let them wreak havoc on your towers like it's the Eastern European front of World War II. Wave 7 continues the onslaught by immediately throwing Cursed Devourers and Enforcer tanks at you. Wave 8 spawns 1 Ravager and 2 Strikers, true to the original mode. After the Dreadnoughts, Wave 9 spawns Cursed Wendigos and sped up Grumbles to rush you, while Wall Pushers would slowly push past your defense. Wave 10 throws Maze Guardians and Cultists at you to try and pick off some of your defense. This is then immediately followed by a rush of Predators and Corrupted Predators on the next wave. On Wave 12, Corrupted Apex Predator spawns alongside more Predators, Maze Guardians, and the things he summons. Wave 13 would then summon Cursed Wendigos, Mace Guardians, and Cursed Devourers. Wave 14, the entire reason I decided to make this mode as an example, would deploy a platoon of Corrupted Golden Juggernauts to actually decimate your towers. I know most of the enemies I throw in here probably aren't that much of a threat to your towers, particularly with medics and most likely the upcoming shield tower, but I do actually want this wave to be deadly. You better have some way of killing these guys fast or stopping your towers from dying, or your towers will be gone. And yes, I think Gold Jug's top path looks better than bottom path, both the corrupted and normal variant. Finally, wave 15 would top it off with, you guessed it, probably not Wretched. See, Wretched is too big, jumpy, and boring for this. I don't see a realistic way where he fits into Endless mode without entirely overhauling him. Therefore, I think Wave 15 should be a combined group of both Dreadnoughts, tanks, and Corrupted Gold Jugs. It may not be the Wretched, but I think it's a cool enough send-off from the segment. Plus, this way we can forget about how mediocre Wretched was, and unfortunately still is. And now, for my final example, I wanted to convert Expert Mode into a segment as well. This not only lets me talk about my clearly favorite mode, but it lets me show how I'd like to see long modes get truncated. To start, Wave 1 would send out a bunch of normals and a few quicks. Wave 2 would spawn normals, quicks, and slows with more emphasis on the quicks and slows. Wave 3 brings enemies that are actual threats, with a few X-Soldiers among more quicks and some exosuit zombies. Wave 4 spawns some Heavy Titans and Skull Drones with a couple X-Soldiers mixed in there. Wave 5 summons many Buzzards and exosuit zombies to cover for the Grenadiers. Jumpers, Heavy Titans, and Super Heavy Titans follow up in the next wave to continue applying pressure. The 7th wave then summons more Heavy Titans, Super Heavy Titans, Grenadiers, and X-Soldiers. Purgatories, Stealth Jumpers, and Super Heavy Titans spawn on Wave 8. Wave 9 brings Revived Monsters, Revived Smashers, Purgatories, a Speed Deployer, and a Sneaky Bound-Aid in the pocket. Wave 10 then follows with a hefty amount of Revived Monsters and Predators, a couple Stealth Purgatories, and a double Sneaky Bound-Aid just to keep you on your toes. Wave 11 is then the Greek trio of Phoebus, Artemis, and Zeus. Wave 12 is then a bit of an intermission with plenty of Revived Monsters, Boundeds, and Pilots. Wave 13 continues with many Stealth Jumpers, Buzzards, Pilots, and most importantly, VX Drone. Wave 14 starts off with a horde of X-Juggernauts, leading the way for X-Ordinals and Damage Deployers. After a short while, Destructor and VX Drone would spawn in to take the spotlight. And please, buff Destructor enough in this to pose a threat to the countless Gold Jugs and warships there will be. He does not need to be easy in this. Wave 15 begins with a Titan Charger rush, followed by Mark II Plus entering for the finale of the segment. And that's it, the segment for Expert Mode is done. Something like this is how I'd like to see long modes be condensed into smaller form factors. Anyways, this has been my thoughts on why Endless doesn't feel great to play anymore, why it should get a rework, and how to go about said rework. I really think this idea has a lot of potential, not only for the game's current state, but for the future too, as having it be consistently updated with the new content will make sure there's something new for players to try and play against fairly often. I also think it will help make Endless into something that isn't 2 to 3 hours of sitting around most of the time. It at least engages the players more often than the current day Endless, and also gives it some much needed difficulty. This not only has plenty of boss fights, but incorporates all the enemies from the other modes, especially the ones that interact with your towers in some way, and it brings flying enemies to the mode. I know this video took a little bit, but thanks for being patient. This one was a bit bigger than the previous two, and I wanted to expand the scope of what I did by a bit, so hopefully I can get back on track to having a real upload schedule, but for now, here's another video where I talk about how TDX could be better.